Former President Trump could face criminal charges over his alleged role in a payment of hush money to adult film star Stormy Daniels.
Trump's former lawyer, Michael Cohen, testified before a Manhattan grand jury this week in the case. The former president faces a number of other investigations, including the Justice Department's inquiry into his handling of classified documents and his actions on January 6th.
CBS News chief Washington correspondent Major Garrett joins us now there from our Washington bureau. Major, how is the Trump team really preparing for a potential indictment now in this hush money investigation?
So one of the things that the Trump legal team, at least in the context of this potential Manhattan indictment, is saying is bring it on. There is a sense within the Trump team that they would like this to be the first charge. They believe it's one that they can argue is either politically motivated. That doesn't cut a lot of ice in a courtroom, but it can with the potential impanelment of a jury. They're also saying that, look, there was an indictment and a plea deal for Michael Cohen. And the Southern District of New York, the U.S. Attorney's Office, empowered there, never indicted former President Trump after he left office for a crime implicated by that plea deal from Michael Cohen. So the Trump lawyers will say, if it wasn't a crime then, as decided by the Southern District of New York, why is it a crime for the Manhattan District Attorney? The district attorney is going to have to answer that, not only in court, but before a jury if he brings the charge. The other thing the Trump legal team will say is, are you really going to indict a former president of the United States on what amounts to a misdemeanor? A misdemeanor under New York code is false filing of business records. It's not the hush money payment, it's what it was called in a business record context. And the Trump legal team will say, is that serious enough? Are you really going to indict a former president of the United States on a misdemeanor? And yes, there is some talk that Alvin Bragg, the Manhattan District Attorney, could add another secondary charge of an election violation under New York law. That would make it a felony. The Trump legal team believes it can argue that one as well. Essentially, in this case and this case only, the Trump legal team is saying, go ahead, proceed. We don't relish an indictment, but we'll challenge one on as many fronts as we can. That is not the Trump legal team's attitude about a charge that could come out of Fulton County, Georgia, or from the special counsel looking into the former president's handling of classified documents or his actions leading up to and on January 6th.
Well, Major, let's talk about the Trump documents investigation. Dozens of Mar-a-Lago staff have reportedly been subpoenaed. What is the status of that inquiry?
Well, that subpoena and those subpoenas matter a great deal because they go to the question of intent. One of the things the former president's legal team has said in the context of these classified documents is the president didn't mishandle them, was trying to be cooperative, and had no intention of suppressing or preventing the National Archives from retrieving them. Well, conversations with those who were at Mar-a-Lago about those documents, how to handle them, what to do with them, would go a great deal to either proving or disproving what the president's intents were. The legal team representing the former president suggests they were benign and cooperative. But these Mar-a-Lago employees might well know otherwise, and that's why the special counsel wants to talk to them. That's a very key matter if you're going to bring a charge on classified documents case. What was the intent? What are the representations already been made in court? And do they conflict with those who were actually there at Mar-a-Lago and heard and saw and acted accordingly in relation to the storage and movement of these documents?
And to that point, Major, you spoke recently with John Kirby. He's the NSC coordinator for strategic communications. And you asked him about whether procedures at the White House perhaps may have changed now when it comes to how documents are classified. Let's share with our viewers what he said to you.
They're time-tested, well-worn, and understood by everybody that works at the National Security Council and at the White House, how you treat classified documents. And so, no, there's been no review, no change in procedures. Those procedures exist for a reason.
Wait a minute, time-tested, everything's fine? Major, I would think that if so, we wouldn't be looking at what we're looking at. What did you make of that?
Precisely. That's the question I then asked John Kirby after that. I said, well, talk to my audience who might reasonably ask themselves, wait a minute, there's a former president who's tripped up by this, quite possibly very seriously former President Trump. There's a former Vice President, Mike Pence, tripped up by this, had documents where they shouldn't have been in Indiana. And there's a sitting president who, as vice president, was tripped up by the same document handling matter. Don't you think there ought to be some review or some explanation or maybe some tightening up? He said, no, it's all good. We're all fine. Nothing has changed within the White House or the federal government writ large under the Biden administration. Now, that might just be a way of saying we're buttoned down. In this rare instance, the former vice president wasn't, but we're all fine. But we wanted to raise that question because with all this conversation about the handling and potential mishandling with some element of possible criminal implications, we thought it might be worth checking in. Have you changed anything? Well, the answer is no. And the country may or may not be pleased or calmed by that, but that's the answer.
Can't wait to hear more of that conversation. Major Garrett, Major, thank you.
Thanks, Major.
Sure.